Nobody believed it when it first hit the internet. A photo, blurry, taken from across the street. The most feared man in Seoul. The man whose name made police detectives go quiet, whose shadow ran half the city's underground. Sitting on a concrete shelter floor with a three-legged dog in his lap and a black woman pressing her hand to his bleeding side. The comments went insane. People said it was fake. People said it was staged. People said Young Min Cha didn't have a heart to expose. But here is what actually happened. A dog with 3 legs ran 6 blocks through midnight Seoul and bit a man with a blade hard enough to save a life. And the woman who pulled that dog out of the rain 2 years earlier. Broke, alone, crying on the roadside while every car drove past. Had no idea that small act of mercy was about to rewrite everything. This is the story of how the most feared Korean mafia boss was saved by a dog. The same dog a black woman named Faith once loved back to life. Stay with this, because it gets worse before it gets beautiful. If you're already feeling something, hit that subscribe button right now because this story is only getting started and you do not want to miss a single second of what happens next. It started on a Thursday night in October, 3 years before any of this. Faith Adeyemi was on her knees in the rain on a narrow side street in Mapogu, Seoul. Her scrubs were soaked through. Her phone was dead. She had just finished a 14-hour shift at the animal shelter where she worked for a salary that barely covered her rent in a city that had never quite made space for her. And there was a dog in the gutter. Small, black, one back leg twisted at an angle that made Faith's stomach drop the second she saw it. The dog wasn't making much noise. That was the worst part. The ones that stopped making noise were the ones closest to giving up. Faith pulled off her jacket, wrapped the dog, pressed it against her chest. Cars kept moving. Nobody stopped. One taxi slowed, saw her, drove on. A couple on the pavement crossed to the other side. She knelt there in the rain, rocking slightly, talking to the dog in a low voice the way her mother used to talk to her when she was sick as a child back in Lagos. Soft Yoruba words that meant nothing to this dog and everything to Faith. She didn't notice the black SUV that had stopped 20 meters down the road. She didn't see the window lower. Didn't see the man watching her from the back seat. Still, expressionless, jaw tight. She didn't see him almost open the door. She didn't see him close it again. The SUV pulled away. Faith got the dog to the shelter on foot. In the rain, holding him against her chest for 35 minutes. The vet came in at midnight on an emergency call. They saved the leg. Barely. Faith named him Gom. It meant bear in Korean. She thought he deserved a big name. She had no idea the man in that SUV had watched the whole thing. No idea that something he buried 20 years ago had surfaced for just a moment in that rain and then sunk back down under all the steel he had built his life from. His name was Young Min Cha, and the entire Chongpa district bowed when he walked through it. Young Min had not started out feared. He had started out hungry. A boy from a family destroyed by his father's gambling debt. The kind of debt that doesn't stay on paper, that shows up at the door, that takes things, that teaches a child very early that warmth is a liability. He learned to be useful, then dangerous, then necessary, then untouchable. By 34, he ran the Chongpa syndicate with a precision that other organizations envied and feared in equal measure. No unnecessary violence. No visible emotion. No loose ends. His second-in-command, Dae-young, handled the loudness. Young Min handled everything else with a quiet that was somehow worse. He had one rule above all others. Nothing gets in. Not love. Not loyalty beyond usefulness. Not the memory of a woman kneeling in the rain holding a broken dog like it was the most important thing in the world. He had managed that rule for 15 years. He was about to fail it completely. Faith had been in Seoul for 4 years by the time all of this happened. She had come on a 2-year contract with an international animal welfare program, stayed when the contract ended because leaving felt like abandoning every animal she had promised herself she would see through. She renewed her visa, found the shelter job, learned enough Korean to work and shop and argue with her landlord. She was good at surviving, not thriving, surviving. The shelter was underfunded, understaffed, and located in a neighborhood that Faith would later learn sat inside Young Min's operational territory. She didn't know that. She just knew the rent for the shelter space was cheap, the owner never asked questions, and the animals came from everywhere. Gom became her shadow. After the leg healed, 3 weeks of carrying him, of sleeping next to his kennel on a folded blanket. He followed her through every room. When new animals came in scared and shaking, Gom walked over first, pressed himself against them, let them calm. Faith watched him do this over and over and thought, he knows what it cost him to still be here, so he makes it mean something. She didn't know she was thinking about herself too. The first collision happened on a wet Wednesday morning 6 months after Faith saved Gom. A man stumbled into the shelter at 8 a.m. Young. Leather jacket. Blood coming through his fingers where he was pressing his stomach. His eyes were doing the rapid calculation of someone who had run out of options and picked the nearest door. Faith looked at him for 1 second. Back room, she said. Now. She didn't ask who he was. She didn't ask what happened. She sat him down on the examination table and worked with the focused calm of someone who had learned that panic costs time you don't have. His name was Ryu. He was 22. He was, she would find out later, a mid-level runner for a rival outfit that had tried to move through Chongpa the night before and had been pushed back badly. She didn't know any of that at 8 a.m. She just knew he was bleeding. She had just finished closing the wound when the front door shook. 3 men, black coats. One of them so large he had to angle through the doorway. The one in front looked around the shelter with the slow scan of someone who owned things and knew it. His eyes landed on Faith. There is a man here who does not belong to you, he said in Korean. We are taking him. Faith's hands were still in her gloves. She walked out of the back room and stood in the doorway, arms slightly out, nothing in her hands, nowhere near enough body between them and Ryu. She knew that. She stood there anyway. He's a patient, she said in Korean. Her accent was imperfect and she said it anyway. You don't take patients. The large man actually laughed. The one in front did not. He pulled out his phone, made a call, said 3 words. Then he looked at Faith for a long moment, looked at her hands. Still gloved, still bloodied, completely steady. He put the phone away. We'll come back, he said. They left. Faith turned around, leaned against the doorframe, and breathed for the first time in 4 minutes. Gom was pressed against her ankle. She reached down without looking and put her hand on his back. Okay, she whispered, to herself, to Gom, to whatever had just held her up. What she didn't know was that the call had gone to Young Min, that he had listened to his man describe the situation, that he had gone quiet in a way that made his man nervous, that when he said leave her, he had meant it without entirely knowing why, that after he ended the call he sat for a long time doing nothing, which was something Young Min Cha almost never did. 3 days later, a new water heater appeared at the shelter, installed. No invoice, no explanation. 2 weeks after that, 6 months of premium animal food was delivered to the door. A month after that, the leaking roof, the one Faith had been patching with buckets and prayers, was repaired overnight. Faith stood under the dry ceiling on a rainy morning and looked up and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time in this city. Like someone saw her. She still hadn't connected it. She thought it was the building owner. Maybe the animal welfare NGO she had applied to. She wrote a grateful post on the shelter's small social media page. Young Min read it. He read it 3 times. He came for the first time on a Monday evening in January. Cap mask. Hands in his pockets. No entourage. He punched in the code. Faith had given it to the building owner, who had quietly given it along, and he walked to Gom's kennel in the back without stopping anywhere else. He crouched down. Gom looked at him from the other side of the wire. 1 beat, 2 beats. Then Gom walked over on his 3 legs and pressed his nose against the wire and sniffed Young Min's fingers. Young Min sat down, right there on the concrete, in his coat that cost more than Faith's monthly salary. He sat down and put 2 fingers through the wire and let Gom sniff them thoroughly and didn't move. Faith came around the corner with a mop and stopped dead. She looked at the man on her floor. She looked at Gom. Tail moving, completely relaxed. She went to the small side table, poured 2 cups of instant coffee from the machine she kept running all day, walked over and set 1 cup next to the man on the floor without a word. Then she sat down 3 feet away and drank her coffee. They didn't speak for 20 minutes. When the man finally stood to leave, he picked up the empty cup and put it on the table. He looked at Faith. "Thank you," he said. His voice was lower than she expected. "Come back whenever," Faith said. He came back the next Monday. And the one after that. By the 5th visit they were talking. Not about anything serious. About Gom. About the other animals. Faith told him about the cat who had arrived with a broken jaw and now operated as though he owned the building. Young Min listened with the concentrated attention of someone who had spent years in rooms where listening was tactical. This was different. He was just listening. Then one evening Faith told him about her mother. She didn't plan to. It came out in the middle of a sentence about something else, the way grief does. How she had been saving for the flight home for 8 months. How she got the call before she got the ticket. She stopped talking. Looked at Gom. Young Min said nothing for a while. Then, "I haven't visited my mother in 2 years. Faith looked at him. "She lives 40 minutes away," he said. The weight of that sentence sat between them. Faith didn't push it. She didn't fill the silence with comfort or questions. She just let it be what it was. Young Min looked at Gom. "Why does he walk like that? Like nothing happened to him?" "Because as far as he's concerned, nothing did," Faith said. "He doesn't think about the leg he lost. He thinks about where he's going." Young Min was quiet for a very long time after that. Dae-young noticed. He noticed the change in routes. The Monday evenings unaccounted for. The softness. Barely visible, barely there. But Dae-young had worked beside Young Min for 11 years, and he knew the difference between a door slightly open and one bolted shut. He had someone follow Young Min. When he got the report, a shelter, a foreign woman, a dog, he felt something that he would have called concern if he was being generous. He was not feeling generous. A woman with no ties to the organization. No leverage. No controllable interest. A foreign woman at that, visible, documented, photographable. It was a security problem dressed up as a personal matter, and Dae-young did not do personal matters. He didn't tell Young Min what he was thinking. He started watching Faith instead. Meanwhile, a journalist named Park Soo-yeon had been building a file on the Chompa syndicate for 14 months. She needed a location. Somewhere close to Young Min's territory that wouldn't raise flags. Somewhere with a natural cover for a person with a camera. The shelter was perfect. She rented the apartment directly across the street under a different name. She started photographing everyone who came and went. She got Young Min on the 3rd week. She didn't publish immediately. She waited. She built the sequence. And when she finally ran the story, she ran it with 12 photographs, a full profile on Faith that Faith had never consented to, and a headline that read, "Chompa Boss Cha Young Min's Secret Life," and the foreign woman at the center of it. Faith woke up to 47 missed calls. She didn't understand what she was looking at for the first confused seconds. Her face on a news site. Her name. The shelter address. Young Min's name attached to hers in a way that made her chest clench immediately because she knew. She knew with the instinct of a woman who had learned early how the world worked. What happened to women who got attached to dangerous men in public. People started arriving at the shelter by 9 a.m. Some were journalists. Some were curiosity seekers. One woman stood outside and screamed things in Korean that Faith's language skills were good enough to understand and wished they weren't. Faith kept the shelter closed and sat in the back with Gom and called the one Korean lawyer she knew, who told her there was nothing legally actionable about photographing a public street. She did not call Young Min. She did not have his number. She realized in that moment. Sitting on the floor, Gom's head in her lap, chaos outside, that she had spent months sitting next to this man and she did not even have a way to reach him. That hit harder than the news story. Young Min went silent for a week. She waited. She didn't want to wait. She kept the shelter running, deflected the people who showed up, spoke to no cameras. She went home every night to her small apartment and sat with the uncomfortable truth that she had let herself look forward to Monday evenings without examining what that meant. On day 6, she sat in the back of the shelter and said to Gom, "I didn't even know I was waiting for him. Isn't that something?" Gom put his head on her knee. "Doesn't help," she told him. "Don't go anywhere. If this story is hitting different, Smash that like button right now and drop a comment telling me who you think was the bravest person in the story so far. Because it is about to get so much more intense. On day 8, Dae-young moved. He called in a favor with someone at the immigration authority. Filed an anonymous report flagging inconsistencies in Faith's work visa. Small things, the kind of technical administrative gaps that exist in almost every foreign worker's file if you look hard enough and want badly enough to find them. It was enough to trigger a formal review. A letter arrived at the shelter on a Friday afternoon in a stiff white envelope. Faith read it twice. Then she put it down on the table carefully, the way you put down something fragile, and she breathed through her nose for a long time. Then she started making calls. She was at the immigration office by Monday morning. She filed the response paperwork herself, sitting in a plastic chair for 4 hours, her Korean pushing hard against its limits, writing and rewriting sentences that needed to be legally precise when she was trained in animal medicine, not law. She found a lawyer online who took cases pro bono. Left a message. Didn't sleep much that night. Tuesday she was back at the shelter at 6 a.m. because the animals didn't care about her visa problems and she was not the kind of person who let the things she was responsible for suffer because she was suffering. She cried once, briefly, in the supply closet. Gom scratched at the door until she opened it. She sat on a bag of dog food and let him crawl into her lap, all of his awkward 12 kilograms, and she held him and cried properly for 3 minutes. Then she stopped, washed her face, went back to work. Young Min found out on Wednesday. He had sources he never fully explained. Information reached him through channels that moved faster than bureaucracy. He heard the visa flag had been filed anonymously. He heard the timing. He pulled the thread. It took him 4 hours to trace it back to Dae-young. He sat with that information for a long time, completely still. His office felt smaller than usual. The people who worked around him that day moved carefully, the way you move around something that is technically not moving but is somehow radiating force. He called Dae-young in at 9 p.m. Dae-young came in straightening his jacket, already prepared with a version of reasonableness. He had a speech ready about security risks and operational vulnerability and the dangers of emotional attachment. Young Min let him start the speech. Then Young Min looked at him. Just looked. Dae-young stopped talking on his own. "You went around me," Young Min said. "I was protecting the organization. You targeted a civilian woman who has nothing to do with our business. Not loud. Not angry in the way people show anger." The stillness in his voice was worse than shouting. "You used her immigration status as a weapon because you couldn't come to me directly. Because you knew what I would say." Dae-young's jaw tightened. "She's changing you. You don't see it. I see it fine. She's going to cost you everything. A foreign woman. All over the internet. Connected to your name. Enough." The single word landed like a door closing. "You're done," Young Min said. "Step back from every active role. You will be compensated. You will not be harmed. But you are done." Dae-young stared at him. "Over a woman. Over the fact that you moved against someone under my protection without my knowledge," Young Min said. "That is not something I forgive. Not from anyone." The room was completely silent. Dae-young left. Young Min sat down, pressed his fingers against his eyes, breathed. Then he stood up, got his coat, and drove to the shelter. It was 11:40 p.m. He came alone. He stopped at the 24-hour Pojamika 3 blocks from the shelter and bought gamjatang because Faith had said once, just in passing, that she never ate properly on late nights. He had remembered without deciding to. He punched in the gate code and stepped into the yard. Gom was awake. He was always awake when Young Min came. Young Min crouched and let Gom sniff his hand first. "It's just me," he said quietly. Gom sniffed. Accepted. Saturday. Young Min exhaled and turned toward the shelter door. He never heard them come in. 3 men. They had cut the back utility latch 2 hours earlier and waited in the narrow supply corridor, the passage between the outer wall and the kennel building. This was not opportunistic. Someone had planned this the moment Young Min started visiting this shelter. Someone who knew his new routine. Someone who wanted to end him somewhere quiet with no witnesses and no guards. The first hit caught him across the back of the neck. He went down to one knee. His hand hit the concrete. Something in his professional wiring refused to let him go all the way down, and he pushed back up immediately, but the second man was already moving, and the third had a blade catching the yard light, and Young Min was in a closed space without a weapon, and he had come here carrying soup. He drove his elbow into the first man's throat. 2 seconds. He grabbed the second man's wrist, and they crashed into the kennel fencing, and every dog in the building erupted at once. Sound breaking open from all sides, enormous and sudden. The blade caught his side. Not deep, enough to burn. Enough to tell him the math was not working in his favor. He got his back against the fencing. 3 men. One with a weapon. Blood soaking through his shirt. This was how it ended. In a shelter. In the dark. Over soup he'd bought for a woman who didn't know he was here. He thought with strange clarity. She's going to find this in the morning. And then something came through the gap at the end of the corridor. Gom had been watching the corridor for 4 minutes. He had been watching the van parked down the street for longer. Dogs don't explain what they know. They see. They wait. They decide. He came through the gap low and fast and completely silent. No warning bark. No hesitation. 3 legs moving with a sureness that had nothing to do with how many he had and everything to do with where he was going. He went straight for the ankle of the man with the blade. Not a warning bite. Not a nip. He locked on with everything he had and pulled. The man went sideways. The blade scraped metal instead of Young Min. The man screamed and kicked, and Gom held. 12 kilograms of dog refusing to let go. Young Min used the half-second. He put the third man down hard. Then the second. Then he crossed the corridor and removed the blade from the equation. Silence. Just the kennel dogs still going. Broth from the overturned bag spreading across the concrete. Young Min with one hand pressed against his side, breathing in controlled pulls through his nose. He looked down. Gom was sitting next to the unconscious man's ankle, looking up at Young Min with the steady, unbothered expression of someone who had done what needed doing and was now waiting to see if anything else was required. Young Min stared at him. His hand was shaking. He noticed it from some detached place. 15 years of staying completely controlled in moments that would have unraveled other men. And his hand was shaking because a 12-kilogram 3-legged dog had just walked into a knife fight for him. He slid down the kennel fencing and sat on the floor. Gom walked over, unhurried, pressed his whole body against Young Min's leg and stayed there. Young Min put his hand on the dog's back. He sat there in the blood and the spilled soup and the fading noise and didn't move. Faith found them 12 minutes later. The kennel noise monitor on her phone had pulled her out of a dead sleep. She had come running down the street in slides and a coat pulled over her pajamas. She punched in the gate code with shaking hands. She came into the yard and stopped. 3 men on the ground, zip-tied with shelter leashes she recognized from the wall hook. Young Min against the fencing, coat dark at the side, face pale in the yard light. Gom in his lap, fully committed, too large for the space he was trying to occupy. Faith looked at the men, looked at Young Min, looked at Gom. He bit someone, Young Min said, voice level, like he was reporting a minor administrative event. Good, Faith said. She was already moving, pulling his hand away from his side, pressing 2 fingers around the wound with the focus of someone who had closed worse. It's not deep, he said. I'll decide that. He let her work. He did not make a sound. Gom did not move from his lap through any of it. Later, after the wound was cleaned and closed with the shelter's first aid kit, after Young Min made 2 quiet phone calls that resulted in the 3 men being collected without police involvement, after the yard was cleared and the kennel dogs had finally settled, they sat together on the floor, backs against the fencing, Gom between them, asleep now, all that precision and fury compressed into a small breathing warmth between 2 people. Young Min looked at the dog for a long time. He didn't bark, he said. He just came. Faith looked down at Gom. He never barks when it's serious. He just acts. Young Min was quiet. I've had men take bullets for me. Paid men. Loyal men. Men who owed me their lives. He paused. This dog doesn't know what I am. Doesn't owe me a thing. Faith said, maybe that's exactly why. Young Min looked at her. She met his eyes. The ones who protect you because of what you are, they're protecting an idea. Gom doesn't know the idea. He just knows you. The you that sits on this floor on Monday evenings and lets him sniff your hand. Young Min said nothing for a while. Then, I need to tell you who I am. I know who you are. He went still. Since when? Since the second week, Faith said. Someone recognized you in the neighborhood and told me. And you kept. I kept making you coffee, yes? He looked at her like she had said something in a language he was still processing. Why? He said. Not aggressive. Genuinely asking. Like the answer mattered more than most things had mattered in a long time. Faith looked at Gom. Because you sat on my floor. Because you let a dog sniff your hand before you moved. Because whatever you are out there. She gestured vaguely at the wall at the city beyond it. In here you were just a person who needed somewhere to be. Young Min was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to speak again. Then, the night I first saw you. In the rain. Faith looked at him. I almost got out of the car, he said. I watched you for 4 minutes. Nobody stopped for you. He stopped. Why didn't you? She asked. A long beat. I told myself I didn't stop because I couldn't afford to be seen doing something like that in the middle of Mapogu at midnight. And actually? He looked at Gom. Because I knew if I got out of that car something would start that I couldn't stop. The yard was very quiet. Young Min, Faith said. He looked at her. Something started anyway. He told her everything that night. Not carefully. Not strategically. The way a person talks when they have been holding something heavy for years and their arms have finally given out. Not gracefully, just all at once. The debt that took his father. The things he had learned to do to survive. The organization he had built not out of ambition but out of the cold logic of a boy who had learned the only protection from the world's cruelty was to become something the world was afraid of. He told her about Dae-young. He told her about the visa report. When he said that part, Faith's face did something that was not quite anger and not quite hurt. Something that lived between them. Something that understood exactly what had been done and what it had cost her those nights alone with her paperwork and her terror. You found out and you removed him, she said. Yes. She nodded slowly. Not grateful. Not performing anything. Processing. I need to ask you something, she said. Ask. Do you want to keep being this? He looked at her. What you are, she said. The thing the whole city is afraid of. Do you want to keep being that? The question sat in the air between them. Simple. Enormous. Young Min looked at the wound on his side, closed now under surgical tape. Looked at Gom asleep between them. Looked at Faith. No fear in her face. Just the direct and searching attention of someone who had decided to ask the real question and would wait as long as necessary for a real answer. I don't know how to be anything else, he said. That's not what I asked. A long silence. No, he said finally. I don't want to keep being this. Faith held his gaze. Then that's where we start. She didn't move closer. She didn't make it easy or romantic. She just said, I'm not going anywhere, but I'm not going to pretend what you do doesn't exist. I can't do that. I'm not asking you to. Good. She reached over and put her hand over his, just resting there, warm and steady the way she did everything. Young Min looked down at their hands. Then he looked up at the night sky above the shelter yard, the narrow strip of Seoul sky visible between the rooftops, orange-gray and light-soaked the way city skies always are, stars lost in the glow. He breathed, slowly, all the way in, all the way out. He couldn't remember the last time he had done that. Subscribe right now if you've made it this far, because what happens next is what this whole story was always building toward, and you deserve to see it through to the end. The exit from the Chongpa syndicate took 7 months. It was not clean. Stories like Young Min's don't have clean exits. There are debts that don't disappear because a person decides to change, obligations that have to be unwound carefully, people inside the organization who need to be transitioned rather than abandoned, rivals who see any sign of withdrawal as an opening to advance. Young Min navigated all of it with the same precision he had built the organization with. He installed a trusted lieutenant to manage the legitimate business holdings, the restaurants, the import logistics, the parking structures, and he separated them formally from the operations he was shutting down. He paid what was owed. He settled what could be settled. There were losses in those 7 months. A warehouse. A relationship with a contact he had worked with for 9 years who took the change personally. One very bad night in March that Young Min never gave Faith full details about, and she had the wisdom not to press for. He came to the shelter the morning after that night with a bruise along his jaw and sat on the floor with Gom and didn't say anything for a while. Faith brought him coffee and sat next to him and after a long quiet said, "Are you okay?" "Not today," he said honestly. "Okay," she said. "Then just sit here today." He sat there for 2 hours. Then he went back out and handled the rest of it. Faith's immigration case resolved in April. The lawyer she had found pro bono turned out to be exceptional. The original complaint was found to have been filed with insufficient basis and dismissed. Her visa status was confirmed. A letter arrived in the same stiff white envelope format as the first one and Faith stood in the shelter kitchen reading it and her hands were shaking so much she had to put it down on the counter. She pressed both hands flat on the counter. Breathed. Gom walked over and sat on her foot. She laughed. First laugh in weeks, sudden and slightly unhinged. The way laughs come when the pressure finally lifts. She picked Gom up, all 12 kilograms of him, and held him and he endured it with great tolerance. "We're staying," she told him. "We're staying." Young Min visited his mother on a Sunday morning in May. He didn't announce it. He just drove the 40 minutes and knocked on the door of the house in Yunpyeong-gu that he had been paying the mortgage on for 6 years without visiting. His mother opened the door and looked at him for a long moment. Her face did several things. Then she stepped back and let him in. She made him sit at the kitchen table. She made rice and soup without asking what he wanted. She put the bowl in front of him and sat down across from him and they ate in silence and it was the most normal thing Young Min had done in longer than he could calculate. When they were done his mother reached across the table and held his hand in both of hers. She didn't say, "Where have you been?" She didn't say, "I know what you've done." She didn't say anything. She just held his hand the way mothers hold things, like the holding itself is the whole point. Young Min looked at the table. He thought about Faith saying, "You're allowed to feel this." He let himself feel it. His mother prayed quietly, her eyes closed, her thumb moving across his knuckles. He did not pray. He just sat there and let her. It was enough. The shelter got a permanent funding grant in June from an anonymous nonprofit foundation. Enough to cover 3 years of full operations, hire a second full-time worker, and properly expand the outdoor area. The source was untraceable to anyone who didn't know where to look. Gom got a custom prosthetic leg fitting at a specialist veterinary clinic in Gangnam, covered by a donor who asked to remain unnamed. The leg was black with small white details. The vet who fitted it said in 15 years she had never seen a dog take to a prosthetic so immediately. Gom walked out of the clinic, tested the new leg twice, and proceeded at full speed like it had always been there. Faith watched him from across the clinic floor and pressed her fingers to her mouth. Young Min stood next to her. "He doesn't even care," he said. "He never did," she said. Young Min watched Gom doing a confident inspection of the clinic waiting area, prosthetic clicking lightly on the tile, tail moving. "I want to be like that," he said quietly, not performing anything, just saying it. Faith looked at him. "You're already becoming it." He looked at her. The man who came in here 8 months ago would not be standing in a vet clinic watching a dog in a tiny prosthetic, she said. He would have been too afraid of what that feeling meant. Young Min said nothing, but the corner of his mouth moved. Just slightly. Faith pretended not to see it. She was smiling too much to be convincing. The final scene happened on a Thursday evening in July. The shelter was closed for the day. The summer light was long and gold and coming through the high kennel windows in the particular way that makes everything look briefly like it has been forgiven for whatever it went through to get here. Faith was doing the end-of-day rounds. Young Min was, as he had been doing more and more lately, simply there, helping with the food bowls, talking to the animals in the low voice he had developed without realizing it, the one that was nothing like the voice that emptied rooms. When the work was done, they sat down on the floor. Same spot, always the same spot. The concrete was familiar to both of them in a way that expensive furniture in the places Young Min owned was not. Gom arranged himself across both their laps with the confident entitlement of an animal who understood that the space between these two people was specifically his. Faith leaned her head on Young Min's shoulder. Young Min looked straight ahead at the kennel wall. Then he looked down at Gom. Then he put his arm around Faith and she settled against him, and the shelter was very quiet except for the animals shifting and breathing and being alive all around them. "I don't know how to be a normal person," he said. "Neither do I," Faith said. "We'll figure it out. A beat. Gom already has," she added. Young Min looked at the dog. Prosthetic legs stuck out at a casual angle, eyes closed, entirely at peace. "He figured out everything first," Young Min said. "He usually does." The gold light moved across the floor. Somewhere in the back kennels a dog sighed the long sigh of an animal that feels safe. Young Min's arm tightened slightly around Faith's shoulders. She did not move away. He breathed again, all the way in, all the way out, the way he had learned to do in this yard, the way he was still learning. Outside, Seoul moved in its enormous indifferent momentum, the city that had shaped him, that had made him feared, that had never once cared about the boy underneath the reputation. In here, 3 beings sat on a concrete floor in the fading light, and none of them needed the city to care. They had something smaller and realer than that. They had this. If the story stayed with you, if Gom, Faith, and Young Min made you feel something you weren't expecting today, then share this with one person who needs to hear that the most broken things sometimes become the most brave. Subscribe for more stories that hit this deep, like this video if Gom deserved that prosthetic leg, and drop in the comments who saved who in this story. Because honestly, after everything, that question doesn't have a simple answer. And maybe that's the whole point.